use of data and analytics in healthcare and some of the advancements in AI.
Hello and welcome everyone to the next episode of the A Media House podcast, Simulated Reality. Today we have with us Prashant Sarpamale. He is the ex Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Oak Street Health, leading the value-based care company just acquired by CVS. And formerly, he was the Senior Vice President of Data Reporting and Analytics for United Healthcare, which is the country's largest insurance company. He has over 25 years of experience in analytics leadership roles and more than 10 years in the healthcare leadership roles. He's currently based out of Eden Prairie in Minnesota. Welcome, Prashant. How are you today?
Thanks for inviting me, Kashyap. It's really exciting to be here. And this sort of touches upon one of my favorite topics, use of data and analytics in healthcare, and some of the advancements in AI that are really sort of contributing to pushing healthcare forward. So happy to talk to you.
Correct. So our topic, today we want to kind of understand Gen AI in healthcare. But, I just wanted to revisit the journey of data and AI, and then kind of seep into, the conversation of generative AI or for healthcare. Given the idea that a couple of years back, or probably a decade back, the data was so unstructured, right, in the industry and everything, this thing. How has the story evolved in terms of data analytics and then data science and then producing predictive to using it on a very day-to-day basis by not just the admin staff or the backend staff, but even doctors, and then in terms of today Gen AI. So if we can talk a little bit around the evolution of data-driven technologies in healthcare, and then maybe we can move a little bit more deeper into the topic.
Yeah, happy to. I remember back in 2012 when I joined the healthcare industry, armed with a lot of knowledge in data and analytics, but with absolutely no knowledge in healthcare. It was sort of a shock introduction wherein looking at the state of maturity from a healthcare perspective for analytics. It was primarily a B2B industry, not so much a B2C industry. And that has repercussions in terms of how data is employed. It was a data-rich industry, and there was a lot of quantitative methods employed, but primarily in a very, very structured fashion. You can think about a lot of data sets in the healthcare industry, and they've traditionally been extremely structured. You can think of HCCs, CPT codes. You can think about how we go about billing. You can think about how we diagnose diseases, etc. And traditionally, all those applications, how we go about setting rates, how we go about measuring things, etc., have been very, very structured. And that was the way how things were done for a long time, right? And that was what was driving the state of analytics at that time. But somewhere around the time when Obamacare got passed, etc., the entire focus started shifting from B2B to B2C and sort of placing the consumer first. So the entire concept of the triple aim came into focus, which was number one around quality, number two around patient outcomes, and number three around cost. So to drive that and to put consumer experience first, you've got to put yourself in the consumer's shoes, understand what the consumer is thinking. And the consumer is a very amorphous being, right? In terms of understanding perception, in terms of understanding behavior, in terms of understanding longitudinal consumer data, etc. All these are very retail, analytical concepts, which are slightly more, probabilistic rather than being very deterministic in terms of how the industry and the data sets and everything was sort of structured. That sort of created the shift to analytics, and predictive and prescriptive analytics sort of drove a lot of the transformation from a technology perspective, etc. Now that sort of because now you have to understand digital, you have to understand surveys, you have to understand unstructured data, because a lot of these data sets are coming in ways and shapes which you're not used to, which are not structured. So, you have to move from relational databases to non-relational databases, etc. So that sort of drove a lot of those changes and started making, the move towards more and more sophisticated ways of doing analytics. And then finally, now we are at a point wherein we are saying, hey, we can drive diagnosis, we can improve drug development, etc. So, I don't know whether we'll get there because the industry sometimes gets in its own way, but it's exciting to see that journey, and I hope that sort of gives you a sense for how we've sort of evolved as a healthcare industry.
No, definitely. I think this is very helpful to set the context of the kind of conversation we are going to have, because we are going to talk about generative AI, and I'm very happy. I think this is one of the first conversations I'm having around a specific domain for generative AI, right? With the context that you just laid, right? How has the conversations around you know uh, healthcare started, especially Gen AI in healthcare started? What are uh, how so let me ask you this: was it again the in most cases where Gen AI came and they said that fit Gen AI into the problems, or did the healthcare industry, you have observed, tried to find out some problem statements and said, hey, maybe Gen AI could solve this, and then maybe this thing? Or is the buzz still, or the hype still kind of running things? Can you help us explain how the conversations have started?
Yeah, so and I think a lot of us in the industry have sort of started off in the same way that a lot of people externally have started off, right? A lot of us have been observing the buzz and seeing the movements in technology. Um, I think this all started out as a huge improvement from a large language model perspective. As a technologist, you start taking a look at what these models do, how they are different from previous sort of iterations and generations, and how they've sort of improved the state of the art. But then what is critical is how you apply it into the healthcare industry, and that's where the rubber meets the road. And I think just as a practitioner of healthcare analytics and somebody who's been in the industry for some time, you start applying it to the unique context of healthcare, right? Which is quite different from in a lot of other industries, they might go in for the most sophisticated applications right away, right? Because that is where it has the largest impact. In healthcare, it is quite different. You probably go in for applications which have the least disruption first, because this is a bit counterintuitive, but think of the way that a new drug is introduced to market or a new treatment is introduced to market. It goes through a lot of trials, and you need to ensure that the efficacy and effectiveness is 100% or very close to very high, or rather improves upon the current state of the art, et cetera, et cetera. So only then it's sort of released into the market after a lot of value discussions, et cetera, et cetera. Why? Because the cost of failure is extremely high. Um, think of any false positives that could come about as a result of these models, and any treatment that occurs.
Hmm.
The cost of those failures could be extremely high. Therefore, you sort of start off, especially in healthcare, with lower impactful, but something that sort of has a bigger impact on your day-to-day work. Think of productivity related applications, right? That's where my perspective is it will start, and it has from an actual application perspective. There has been some very, very interesting work which is sort of coming out of a lot of startups, some of the large companies, um, around things like drug discovery or image analysis, etc. And they're hitting the headlines. But in terms of actual application, this is how it would play out, and that's my perspective.
Correct. In terms of talking about some of the use cases, right? And given the context that you set in terms of, the high cost of failure of the application, which is very crucial considering this is, a patient's health at stake. What are some of the use cases you have been, I don't know if they're successful or maybe seeing near success. If you can just kind of visit them, help understand some of the use cases that are. Drug discovery is obviously one of the biggest Gen AI use cases, and it made the headlines. But more from a perspective of an enterprise, is that was more like a research, that meant to be successful that now will go into production.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Some of the actual applications that will sort of pan out initially in every industry are productivity related applications. Think of even things like research, right? Clinical research. The way it'll actually impact that entire industry is it'll shorten the timeline of doing research, or it'll improve the quality of research. Okay. Think of even basic things like, for example, in healthcare IT, co-pilots in terms of coding, or looking at coding quality, etc. Right from that base layer to the next level in terms of how you go about the entire healthcare processes, in terms of how pre-authorizations are done, how claim processing is done, how engagements with customers are done in terms of chatbots, etc. That entire process will should get much easier because of these generative AI driven applications. Think of when you sort of go through an appeal process for a claim. Think of how difficult it's how painful it gets if the entire process gets much simpler, because it's easier to sort of take a decision on that case within the insurance company and get that communicated out to you in a much simpler and quicker fashion. So all these productivity related aspects, in my view, will drive the initial value. Even things like, say, image analysis, right? Say in a doctor's office or in complex cases, you want to sort of utilize imagery to drive better decision making. This could be a pre-authorization decision, or this could be a diagnosis related decision, or this could be medical treatment related analysis, etc. Being able to sort of fuse a lot of this imagery and actually marry that with longitudinal clinical data and provide insights will sort of improve, right? But at the end of the day, what is it really doing? It is improving productivity across the board, improving accuracy, improving quality. So that's really the application of generative AI in a lot of these processes.
That's interesting you say that. And one of the questions that I have is that was a very similar language we use for AI as well, right? Like it will improve the productivity. How can you explain, help us understand what's the difference between AI and generative AI in this context?
I look at it as sharpening the spear, right? So if you look at the previous generation and where we are headed to with generative AI, um, so just look at, say, the specific example I just gave, right? Say medical imaging, right? So from a generative AI perspective, you are able to use something called generative adversarial networks, GANs, to drive better imagery. What does it do? It sort of brings together significant amount of data which is already there, and simulates and gives you significant amount of synthetic data which is similar to what is out there in the real world, so that you can compare and contrast and be able to sort of pinpoint and be able to simulate, pinpoint, etc., in a much better fashion. So the quality of your diagnosis will go up, your ability to predict and pinpoint much earlier in the process will go up, so the ability to prevent, intervene, and drive better outcomes will be much improved. and the cost of these and the and the benefit with some of these micro improvements is significant. Like for example, if you're able to sort of move from one to an earlier stage of detection, say in say kidney disease, that is a significant improvement, because keep in mind that 5% of or 3% of all cases drive 55% of medical cost, right? So that's because that's a very important statistic to keep in mind, because it's a very, very small sliver of people who are chronically ill or significantly ill who drive significant medical cost in the system, and all the treatment, all the drugs, everything goes to this small population, and the entire focus is to ensure that more people don't get added to that population, or how to reduce that population so that we can prevent people adding to that small sliver of population, right, who drive the significant medical costs. Now, if you can sort of detect much earlier or slightly earlier, then that's a significant win in terms of cost, in terms of experience, in terms of lifespan for that person, etc. So
Yeah.
that way it is sharpening the spear,
Yeah.
uh,
Just 2 years back, whenever I had a conversation with leaders, any leader, right, there was not a single conversation, especially in the context of AI, that did not visit COVID-19. But it's been 2 years that I've not spoken with, right? Just hypothetical, can you walk us through a hypothetical situation? I know that this is not something, but if we had the power of Gen AI, which we have today, or at least a more deeper understanding, let's say before 2020 or 2019, let's say 2 years before, how do you think the scenario would have panned out a little bit differently, given that you're saying one of the things that Gen AI is really helping is reducing the time for research, right? So in that context, would it have helped differently?
yes, I would agree with that contention. um, uh, so improving the productivity of the research process, shortening the time to market is something that technology is getting better and better, and generative AI is sort of pushing that envelope. Yes, to that extent, maybe we could have sort of reduced the time to market there. um, uh, yeah. So from a COVID-19 perspective, the other thing that sort of comes to mind is if you sort of step back from the entire drug discovery process and clinical research and trial and etc., and sort of look at the social impacts, right? In terms of how COVID-19 was managed, right? If you look at how COVID-19 spread across the world, it went from the east to the west, the initial wave, and a lot of the West sort of reacted very late, right? Primarily because there was not a lot of awareness in terms of, hey, what is happening, what is coming, etc., etc. Um, my belief is that increasingly we'll be able to harness data and be able to see a lot of these black swan events, or should be able to see black swan events sooner as these ripples sort of flow, right? You think of putting a stone in a pond, and then the ripple sort of spreads in the pond. If you're at the bank of the pond and this ripple is coming from the middle, then it takes a long time to sort of reach the bank. But you should be able to sort of shorten that tail, if you will, significantly, with better analysis, and better understanding of how these things are going to play out with the uh, power of technology. Say, for example, if you were able to synthesize a lot of the conversations, again, sort of just think simple application. Go to Bing today and type in, or go to Google today and say, what is COVID-19, right? What is COVID-19, right? And immediately the co-pilot will give you a list of very smart curated answers saying, this is what COVID-19. What should I do about COVID-19? It will immediately tell you, do this, right? Based on the power and understanding of the web. Was this there in 2019? No. Could it have helped? Absolutely, it would have helped, because it would have immediately told you on your phone that, or wherever you searched, this is what you've got to do about it. And this, when I say shorten the tail or shorten the ripple, this would have sort of shortened it. It would have reduced the number of casualties significantly, and that is the power of technology, right? So I hope that sort of gives you
No,
the.
definitely. I think that's something very interesting. I wanted to revisit this hypothetical situation, and I'm sure it has a lot of potential. We are also exploring in a lot of sense in the context of healthcare. I think you have shed a lot of light. One final question to you, right? And that has always been not just with Gen AI, but any technology, especially AI and ML technologies, is the adoption part of it, right? There are different stakeholders involved in the adoption of Gen AI, right? Right from the admin to the someone who's running the admin to insurance to the doctors themselves, right? What is your observation? What has your observation been in the past couple of weeks in terms of when service providers are pitching ideas for building Gen AI or catered Gen AI for healthcare? How has the adoption been for the different stakeholders in the healthcare ecosystem, and how will it evolve according to you over the years?
Yeah, the adoption cycle will move exactly like I said, which is initially it'll start off with the back office or a lot of the healthcare processes and improve the healthcare processes. Then it'll sort of spread into more medical domains in terms of adoption, as and when more evidence is collected in terms of efficacy and effectiveness, then it will move into the provider's office. Other thing to remember is that providers typically, and I don't mean this in any negative sense, but typically providers don't have the time and the don't have time of the day in order to engage in deep conversations on, say, analytics or technology, etc. A lot of this has to be matured by the time it reaches a provider's office. A provider isn't going to sit in front of his or her patient and actually prescribe something or utilize a new technology until he or she is comfortable with it himself or herself, right? So, and typically that takes a bit of time, that bridge. So the way it will reach the provider's office is simple productivity related application. For example, today providers spend a significant amount of time doing a lot of documentation after each visit. I see that getting cut down. For example, things will be built right into the EHR in terms of AI driven applications. That will sort of improve. People will start seeing the impact of that. After that, we'll move into diagnosis, medicine, prescriptions, etc. And that's the way it'll sort of move.
Fantastic. Great insight, Prashant. This was a very interesting conversation. You know, puts a lot of things into perspective when we talk specifically about a domain, because then Gen AI and its adoption as a technology is a very broad topic, right? And it has very, very different answers based on this. So thank you so much for providing your perspective on the healthcare industry.
No.
You've worked in the industry for so long. I'm sure our audience will find it really,
I
really.
think there are, yeah, I think there are, while we talk about Gen AI, I mean, any AI and any technology in the healthcare industry, I think there are two concerns that, we have to sort of keep in mind. Um, First, as a chief data and analytic officer, as somebody who sort of drives budgets too, in addition to outcomes and services, etc. One thing you're always worried about is cost, right?
Mm,
The outcomes or the value that you generate needs to outweigh the costs involved.
mm,
Um, doing increasing amounts of AI driven activity is very expensive in terms of server and processing time, etc. The amount of horsepower that you need to throw at the thing is significant, and the amount of time spent in experimentation with regard to these the data sets is significant, right? Before you start to see value. That is one concern that people will have, and that is my point about maturing of the technologies before it sort of reaches the provider office. The second thing is ethical. In the healthcare field especially, there will be ethical considerations as it moves deeper into, say, the clinical trial space, into the drug development space, or even treatment space. One thing people will be concerned about is, because Gen AI will throw up a lot of possibilities. Because think about, say, utilizing Gen AI in, say, a molecule development or a drug development sort of process. The number of options, the number of combinations that it might throw up is significantly larger as compared to the past. It might throw up combinations which have not even been thought of, right?
Mm.
um, and some of those might have ethical considerations linked to that, right? But increasingly, this will throw up and open windows and doors which have not been even considered in the past, and it will throw up a lot of ethical debate. And
Yeah,
this sort of relates back to what a lot of AI leaders sort of pointed out to Congress, US Congress, some time back, in terms of, hey, we've got to get more thought process around how to regulate, around how to sort of govern the entire process of using AI. For example, if you're going to put a chip inside someone's brain, and sort of, and that becomes a conduit into sort of actually, driving both data as well as enabling technologies for that person. The intent is noble, but tomorrow that could open up a lot of possibilities. And once it sort of becomes widespread, those applications will drive a lot of questions. So the entire ethical field, I think, needs to sort of develop. It's not just a personal thing, but uh, having answers to some of those and having some of the guardrails will be most important as we go into healthcare, because it's sort of, in this field, because it is so closely related to health and people's lives. People will have ethical concerns, and
yeah.
so something that the industry needs to be very, very aware of.
Yeah, I think the entire topic of ethics around this, we should have another podcast with you because I think that's a very broad topic, right? In terms of understanding.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, but I just wanted to sort of highlight those two topics.
I think it's a bit worth mentioning, especially in this podcast. I just think that it's a very broad topic, and maybe we can set up another podcast episode with you. But thank you so much, Prashant, for making the time. This has been really insightful, really helpful, very to the point. And thanks again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you, Kashyap.